everybody. I need to think of I'm going to start doing the Russian greeting, which is Privyet. I know when I had my Russian teacher on, I kind of got Privyet and Paka confused, and I said hello when I meant to say goodbye. But so I won't do hello, everybody. I'll do Privyet just because it's Lenin. And yeah, today is a very interesting piece. And it's one of my favorite because in America, there's a myth of the hardworking job creator who works so hard and has an inspirational idea, like Dave Rubin, ideas. And so, but Lenin kind of explains how capitalism, as in the automation and mass production of commodities, that is capitalism. It is actually changes the private property laws and ends up actually kind of not respecting private property. So that's the first piece. The second piece is called impoverishment in capitalist society. Okay. As for the first piece, all you have to do is take I forgot to say that the Substack is right now down. So we won't have the annotated version for you until later, which we will mail out. Just join us at vilenin.substack.com. And, I had all these figures, and the minute I can upload it, you'll see. Just take these numbers and multiply it by 10 to the power of 6 for it to be true, and add 100 years so Lenin says 1900, just if you add 100 and multiply the numbers by 10 to the 6, everything is true. So with that in mind, I apologize that we won't be sending out the annotated version until later. I hope you guys enjoy today, which we pre-recorded with Krystal Ball from The Hill TV, and now she has a new show called Something with Kyle, and we'll put the link on the description box below for you guys to watch later.
Hello, everyone. Today we have a very special guest, Krystal Ball from The Rising, and which is available on Hill, and now she has a new podcast with Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk. That's his show, right?
Yep, you got it. You nailed it.
I sometimes the YouTubers blend in, so I was just like, I just had to look him up just to make sure.
We are all special, unique little flowers, Esha. How dare you get us all mixed up?
So, well, tell us about your new show. What's it called, and what made you start it?
So it's called Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. And Kyle and I have been talking about doing something together for a little while. And I guess what I wanted was a space. First of all, I was excited to have a space that was Sagar and I have a left-right dynamic, which I really, enjoy. And I think it's interesting to find the places where we have overlap, places where there are differences. All of that is what we do on Rising. But I wanted a space also that was just someone who's, really ideologically aligned with me, and where we could have longer form conversations. So we do longer interviews there. And that was something Kyle was excited about too, because he doesn't do interviews on Secular Talk. So that's what it's all about. And it's on Substack. The way we do it, it has a video version and an audio version. The audio version is free. It's available on all the regular podcast platforms. It has no ads, all of that good stuff. If you want to get it a day early and you want to see the video, it's $5 per month on Substack. So there's the plug.
That sounds very reasonable. And what's the URL again?
It's substack.com. If you go there and just search for Krystal, Kyle, and Friends, you'll find it.
Okay. We'll put it in the description box. So I guess for me, what I really liked about I've seen, I do confess I have not watched or listened to Krystal and Kyle yet, but I will rectify that this week. What I like about The Rising is that you are not there's no reason for you to ever defend the Democratic Party or anyone. And so I always see that you just call out whatever BS you see that week. My favorite one was the one where you had the thing about Russiagate, where you explained all the ridiculous points. That was really good.
That's evergreen content, because it just like the whole thing never dies. And yeah, that's kind of, I mean, that's what we really try to do. And look, we all have our biases. We all have our blind spots. But I think part of why people are so disgusted with most corners of the media is because they just turn into cheerleaders for whoever their favorite team is. And so I think the reason why people have really responded to Rising is because we really studiously try to avoid doing that. I mean, even look, obviously I was a Bernie Sanders supporter, but when he was messing up, I'm going to say something about it. You know, I have a soft spot for Andrew Yang. I like some of the things that he has to say, but when he writes his op-ed saying, hey, BDS is equivalent to anti-Semitism, we're going to say something about it. So I think that's what people appreciate, is that we're never going to be perfect. We're always going to get some things wrong, but we really do try to be even-handed and honest brokers. And it sounds like such a basic thing, but it does not exist in mainstream media. So I think that's what people have really responded to. And like you said, look, I mean, I'm cheering for Joe Biden to prove me wrong and be FDR and all of these things, but I'm also not going to hesitate to point out the vast distance between those aspirations and what he's actually doing in office.
Okay. So one concept that both you and Kyle have talked about is Washington brain. Can you explain it? Because a lot of people kind of understand the concept of corruption. They understand that Joe Manchin gets money from the coal lobby, therefore he's opposed to fracking. Mm-hmm. But then there's a second, more insidious, not insidious, but just explain like how Washington brain can have that same effect without actually without even having money, I guess.
Yeah, it's a little harder to put your finger on, right? Because it's not, you can't say like, oh, they got a donation and now they're acting on behalf of the interests that they took the money from. Mm-hmm. I mean, but I think it's actually I think anyone can relate to this feeling of, it's basically like peer pressure. I mean, the way humans are wired is we're very social creatures. We get into groups. And in order to fit in, we tend to adopt the like mindset of the groups that we associate with. So, and look, I'll say for me, I have to check myself on this a lot because I came from the mainstream media world. So a lot of the people that we cover and criticize, I know some of them are really nice people. Some of them I know on a really super personal basis. And that makes it a lot harder to criticize them. It makes it a lot harder to not even trick yourself into thinking that by covering for them, that you're actually doing the right thing, that you're taking the right stance, et cetera. And so it's one thing to be outside of DC, where, you know, Nancy Pelosi and the other members of Democratic leadership aren't your colleagues and your friends and people who you're having direct personal interaction with. It's one thing to be outside of that system and throwing bombs and talking about let's turn over the table and let's shake things up, et cetera. But when you get there and you have a personal relationship with them, it becomes a lot harder. And so, look, I think you see this with the way that AOC has evolved since she's been in Congress. I don't want to single her out. She's just the person who I think has a trajectory that people will know about and will be able to relate to. So she comes in and her first act is like protesting for the Green New Deal outside of Speaker Pelosi's office. And then over time, you see that, you know, that becomes more uncomfortable for her. There was an interview with her a while back where she kind of had some reflection on those dynamics and this push and pull between being the outsider and trying to get things accomplished in Washington. And you oftentimes see this as like, you know, the ethos and the ideology within Washington brain is you got to go along and get along. And that's how you're able to deliver results. That's the way you play the game. If you actually are serious about getting things done, this is the way that you ultimately have to do things. And so you see that case being made repeatedly and the social pressure coming to bear. And that's why you see people acting in a different way in Washington than they did outside. Elizabeth Warren is, I think, another great example here. When she first was on the scene, I mean, she really kind of stepped into the political arena, challenging Joe Biden on his bankruptcy bill very aggressively. She called out Hillary Clinton in her book. I mean, some of the language she used around Joe Biden was really, I mean, in my view, phenomenal. She was saying, look, you want to hold up yourself as this advocate for women, but you can't, you know, sell out women in the morning and then claim to be their champion in the evening. just because of something that you passed back in the 90s. I'm paraphrasing, those weren't her exact words, but you see the longer that she's been in DC, now she's just kind of faded into being basically any other Democratic Paul in the Senate. She's really, she's offering the wealth tax. That's fantastic. But in terms of really trying to change the game itself, she said it herself during her campaign that she's a player in the game. So I think, like I said, it's actually a very human trait. It's one that I have a lot of empathy for, because I think we've all been there. I think we all feel those pressures from our peer groups and don't want to rock the boat and want to be accepted and all of those things. But I do think it has an insidious effect when the goal of your movement is to overturn the existing structures of power, and then the people that you elect in hopes of doing that get co-opted into, believing that, okay, actually the thing we need to do is work within this system rather than overturn it.
Yep. I mean, I've seen, like with AOC, I guess, I don't mean to pick on her, but she's just the most obvious example. Mm-hmm. The first thing I've seen is that she like buckles really quickly on foreign policy. Like she went, she's, and it's, of course, with regards to foreign policy, you're never going to get status quo will always be wrong if you don't do that extra effort to dig what's underneath the magic ball. And so like even last week, she's suddenly like, free Tibet. And I'm like, oh, we don't want to like bring back slavery there. And so I just noticed that I'm not saying that it's just that foreign policy was the first place where I saw the slip, and then it seemed to have bled over everywhere else.
That's interesting. Well, and I think that's common. I mean, I think maybe the area where it's hardest to buck the conventional wisdom, the established power structures, is foreign policy. And you see this in the fact that, the American people vote president after president to get out of the endless wars. And yet we are still in the endless wars, because once they come in office, all of this pressure of the foreign policy establishment has come to bear. You're soft on terror, you're anti-Semitic. It may be the single most difficult place to buck the sort of groupthink in Washington, because also, I mean, there's just so much money involved in maintaining the current status quo in foreign policy that piece can never be ignored. And again, it may be that you're not personally taking any of the money from Northrop Grumman or Lockheed or any of the big defense contractors, but because you're in this system that is so corrupted overall by that money and by their objectives, it's hard to resist. I think someone who's done a good job in that arena has been Ro Khanna. I think he's been a real leader and been very courageous and out front on some of the stances that he's taken. But yeah, by and large, I think that's an area where it's really hard to go against the grain.
Yeah. It's funny, like a few weeks ago, I did not do anything with regards to this Navalny getting pulled from Amnesty International. But somehow I got lumped. It was the gray zone, and yet somebody lumped me in with the gray zone people as, I don't know, kinkies or whatever the new word is. Like I curse whoever taught liberals that word.
I've been blessedly ignorant of whatever debate you're talking about.
Okay. So basically, Gray Zone released an article that caused Amnesty to say that Navalny is a white supremacist because he did Hitler salutes with like swastikas. Whatever. I mean, this is like old news.
Okay.
But then because Amnesty pulled him from prisoner of conscience status, they've been just like going after people who they think are responsible. And even though I never worked at Gray Zone, and the only relationship with Gray Zone is that I interviewed Max and Ben once.
Okay.
Like,
How dare you?
I know. I've still been like involved. Like I've still been called like Assadist, Putinist, whatever. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes, I definitely know what you mean. Trust me, just sitting next to Sagar every day, I get the like, Sagar likes Tucker and Tucker is this and this one is that. Ergo, you're basically Hitler. I mean, seriously. I'm like, okay, Sagar has some really cringe takes sometimes. I get it. But if we can, so Sagar's like the most reasonable person you could possibly get on the right. If we can even talk to this person, like that we're totally hoes, we may as well just like wall ourselves off in Brooklyn and hope for the best, you know?
Exactly. Okay. Yes, that one. For me, I'm always happy when somebody who's not psycho goes on Fox News, because I think do I want people who listen to Fox News to listen to Glenn Greenwald, or do I want them to listen to whoever that other neocon that Tucker was going to have?
Like, right. Or like Candace Owens or whoever. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, for me, it's like a no-brainer, but somehow I don't understand, like, Fox News is bigger than all of us. Like, we can't control them. Like, so the best we can do is like use whatever opportunity we have to reach out to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of silly. This idea of like, oh, you're platforming this person or you're legitimizing this person. And that may be true in certain instances, but when you have someone who has a massive multi-million person audience already, like if Glenn never goes on, that's not really going to change. So do you want to have someone on who's going to at least, gain some credibility with the audience, present to them some arguments that they haven't heard before? Or do you want to just, let their minds be filled with the typical garbage that comes out of Fox News? It's actually, I don't know if you caught this. There was an article. And again, like I had some issues with how Andrew Yang ran his presidential campaign. I have some issues with how he's running his mayoral campaign. But there was this total hit job in Politico recently about him. Did you catch this?
No, tell me.
The whole conceit of the article was like, when he was running for president, he went on with these right-wing podcasters. Ergo, now he's problematic and this is an issue. And they pulled on some quotes from his appearances on these podcasts that were really pretty anodyne. I was like, geez, if you talk for long enough, surely you're going to say something that someone's going to find problematic. But the whole idea was that you shouldn't even be going on these platforms and even trying to reach out to an audience that doesn't already share your ideology. And look, some of the people that he went on with, I like, respect. Some of them I don't like or respect. None of them am I exactly ideologically aligned with, but it was like, oh, Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and so I just think this guilt by association is really silly. I think the idea that we shouldn't try to appeal to audiences that don't exactly share our ideology, I think is extraordinarily counterproductive. And the way that they went about trying to attack him over that, I just found extremely gross, especially given the fact that, look, when he was running for president, the mainstream media, they wouldn't interview him. They wouldn't cover him. They'd leave him off of graphics. He'd be, doing well in the polls, and they just leave his name out of the graphic that they did about the poll. They called him the wrong name. They called his wife the wrong name, all that stuff. So they had shut him out. And then they're mad that he went to independent, like to wherever he could to try to get his message out. And you can't have it both ways. Maybe if they had covered him fairly, he wouldn't have felt the need to go on with Ben Shapiro or Dave Rubin, but who cares that he did?
Yeah. And to me, one video that really like did it to me was where he was talking to people who were, I guess, formerly alt-right. And then they realized it's not immigration, but automation that's causing the jobs to go away. And then
yes.
And he knew how to reach them in a way I would never have thought of. And that was good enough for me.
Well, that's such a great point, is that he was actually good at that. Like, shouldn't we be celebrating that?
Yeah.
He was one of the candidates who had the most actual former Trump supporters backing him. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And he's actually good at persuading people who have a different ideology. So we should be applauding that, celebrating that, saying, please go back on Ben Shapiro's show and convince and persuade more people. But for some reason, that is not I think that is the predominant, like, I think the overwhelming majority of people would be like, okay, what's the problem here? But, there's this media conversation or their attempt to make it seem like this was some big issue for him that was really gross to me.
Yeah. But then like, they don't mind having, to me, it's the hypocrisy reeks. Like, if you have on the CIA director, John Brennan on MSNBC, like, you can't get more white supremacist than that. So just like.
Very good points. Yes, very good points. Like, you're problematic for going on with Ben Shapiro, but next up is going to be John Brennan, and let's bring on the Lincoln Project guys back. They're amazing, right? Let's build up their credibility with our audience. Yeah, exactly.
Project to bomb Iraq.
Bill Krystal up next. It's like, okay, yeah, I see your moral credibility is really intact here.
Okay, so what I really like about Lenin, for me personally, is that we've had like he does the thing about like calling out the deputies or the congressional people who kind of got their version of Washington brain, which is St. Petersburg brain. And they thought like they could work with the czar. And of course, for us, it sounds ridiculous when you're like, what? You can't have a constitution with the czar because the definition of a king is like,
right. They get
whatever
to do
he
what
does.
they want. Yeah.
And so, but then like we can't, but we've been so ideologically forced into thinking we live in a democracy and whatever freedom, blah, 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 that we can't see that sometimes our system is identical.
Yeah.
Except we get a czar every 4 years.
Right. No, that's really true. We covered on Rising today, new polling about the minimum wage. It's like, I think it was like 85% of Americans are like, it's too low. 2/3 were like, yes to $15 an hour. And yet you can't even get a majority for that. You can't even get all of the Democrats on board with what is a totally mainstream position. It just shows you that the will of the people is essentially irrelevant to people in Washington. Oftentimes they respond, and there's science to back this up. This isn't just like you and I making shit up. They find that, the desires and interests and priorities of the average voter basically has no bearing on what happens in Washington. And what does have bearing is what elites and what donors, what the wealthy in America want. Those are the priorities that get surfaced and get acted on. And, I think we've seen that over and over and over and over again.
Yep. And that actually segues into our first piece perfectly. It's called The Growth of Capitalist Wealth. And what I really like about this piece is that it, you'll read it and we'll see how it just literally, like, there's not, I don't even have to change anything except the date to make it applicable.
All right. I have it pulled up here. So you want me to read this?
Yes, please.
Okay. The growth of capitalist wealth. Capitalists are not inclined to be frank about their incomes. Commercial secrets are strictly guarded, and it is very difficult for the uninitiated to penetrate the mysteries of how riches are piled up. Private property is sacred. No body is permitted to meddle in the affairs of its owner. Such is the principle of capitalism. Capital, however, has long since overstepped the bounds of private property and introduced joint stock companies. Hundreds and thousands of shareholders who do not know each other make up a single enterprise, and these property owners are quite often diddled by smart businessmen who empty the pockets of their business partners using commercial secrets as a cover. Sacred private property has been forced to sacrifice a bit of its sacredness. Laws have had to be made compelling joint stock companies to keep proper books and publish the chief results of their accountancy. This, of course, has not prevented the public being swindled. The swindling has merely taken new forms and become more subtle than before. Big capital, gathering around itself small sums of shareholders' capital from all over the world, has become more powerful still. Through the joint stock company, the millionaire now has at his disposal not only his own million, but additional capital of, say, 800,000 rubles that may have been gathered from 8,000 petty proprietors. This makes the absurdity of capitalism much clearer to the masses of the population. Take, for example, the published reports of insurance companies in Russia over a period of 10 years from 1902 to 1911. In 1902, share capital amounted to 31.3 million rubles in 21 joint stock companies. And in 1911, in the same 21 companies, it was 34.8 million rubles. The greater part of the capital usually belongs to a handful of millionaires. God, isn't that true? 10 or 20 magnates perhaps hold shares for 18 million rubles, which gives them a majority vote, and they can, without any control, dispose of the other 13 or 16 million rubles belonging to small shareholders. The professors who defend capitalism chatter about the increase in the number of property owners when they see a growth in the number of small shareholders. What actually happens is that the power and the income of the millionaire magnates over the capital of the small fry is increased. Just see how our insurance kings have expanded in the course of this 10 years. The average dividend on share capital for the 10 years was more than 10%. Not a bad profit, eh? In the worst year of the decade, they earned 6 kopecks in the ruble, and in the best year, 12 kopecks. Reserve capital was doubled. In 1902, it amounted to 152 million rubles, and in 1911 to 327 million rubles. Property was almost doubled as well. In 1902, it was valued at 44 million rubles, and in 1911 at 76 million rubles. The result, in 10 years, in 21 companies, 32 million rubles worth of new property. Who earned this property? Those who did not work, the shareholders, and first and foremost, the millionaire magnates who hold most of the shares. The work was done by hundreds of employees who canvassed insurance clients, inspected their property, labored over the accounts. These employees remained employees. They do not receive anything more than their salaries, which, as we know, are in the majority of cases insufficient even to maintain a family decently. They cannot accumulate any property. If any of the magnates did a bit of work as a director, he received special remuneration in the form of a ministerial salary and bonuses. The gentlemen holding the shares grew rich for not working. During the decade, they received on the average 3 million a year net profit for the toil of clipping coupons and accumulated additional capital to the tune of 32 million rubles.
So this just reminds me of basically everything that happened during COVID, about how the billionaires got richer and everyone else got poorer. And instead of millionaires, we just have to change it to billionaires and just change the dates and everything. If you do, it seems like it's only, the only difference is instead of millions, we're now in the billions.
Right. I don't know if you saw, I saw some numbers this week, the top 9 billionaires, who all, by the way, are like tech bros, tech oligarchs, tech plutocrats, whatever you want to call them. Their wealth expanded so exponentially over this year that just the gain in their wealth could have nearly paid for the $1,400 checks that went out to, 100 million Americans or whatever it was. Like, that's how much wealth just that they gained, not that they have just that they gained in this one year, they could have sent checks out to basically every American. That's insane. I saw a stat about how, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, I guess he's now technically not their CEO. Anyway, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. The wealth that he gained this year, he could have given every single Amazon worker more than $100,000 bonus. Just again, in what he gained this year, as the overwhelming majority of Americans and frankly people around the world were suffering, were lining up in food banks, were losing their jobs, were losing hours, were worried about their homes, were, dying, being forced into essential jobs with no extra pay to compensate for the wildly increased level of risk that they were facing. And yeah, that's not an accident. I mean, that's a microcosm of the whole system and structure that we've set up.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The last time I checked was in October. Between March and October, Jeff Bezos went over 100 billion, and I can't even imagine how many. 1 billion is a lot of money, and 100 of those, that's it's probably worth more than all of the GDPs of many countries.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, 1 billion is an unfathomably large amount of money just in and of itself. And then 100 billion, you can't even wrap your head around it. And it's a public policy choice. I mean, the American elites created the system that would guarantee that in times of crisis like this one, that wealth would be massively funneled to the top. And in fact, the original CARES Act structure guaranteed that would ultimately be the case. Because look, crises, this always is sounds flippant to say, but crises present you with an opportunity to remake a system, right? This was a horrific year. It was going to be a horrific year no matter what amount of suffering and death that, is just unconscionable and that you really can't even start to contemplate. But it was also a chance to turn things in a different direction. And instead, we just doubled down on the same trickle down, everything to the top, scraps to the bottom. We're going to make sure that they are bailed out to the tune of trillions of dollars. Meanwhile, small businesses are going under. Meanwhile, it just says everything that in this relief bill, which, look, I don't want to downplay its significance, going to help a lot of people. But what are the items that got haggled over? It was how much money goes in the checks. Are we going to means test them? It was unemployment. It was all the direct aid, which, by the way, were the most popular provisions in the bill. They were also the ones that were the most haggled over. I think that says it all. And of course, the $15 minimum wage increase, which again, as I mentioned before, wildly popular, gets left down entirely because of the pathetic excuse of the Senate parliamentarian ruling against it. I guess they're the like fourth branch of government now.
Yeah. And then the worst part is the bad faith. They just make up the rules as they go along. Like,
yeah, that's right.
The parliamentarian doesn't stop them, but it's like, and that's the worst part is that I want people to have like people don't even know what to expect from the government. I mean, we deserve somebody who's gonna like write articles like this to be our leader, like who's gonna talk about how billionaires are making so much money and things like that. And people are. For me, it was kind of, Janet, I'll share this video later, but...
He demanded the owners, including billionaire Oleg Deripaska, sign an undertaking to restart the factories.
Вы подписали этот договор? Да. Олег Владимирович подписал? Что я не вижу вашей подписи? Идите сюда, подпишите. Идите ко мне. Договор. Только вторичку мне, видите?
Classic Putin.
For me, like people were putting this video of like Putin like telling a billionaire to like give him back his pen, which I mean, he saved a factory or whatever. But then like I was like really surprised by how many people were like really touched by this mostly ceremonial act because they've never had a politician stand up to the rich. Like even the politician doesn't even feel the need to pander to us anymore, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I just keep thinking back and to kind of circle back to our conversation about DC Brain and Elizabeth Warren and AOC and even Bernie. It's like, there's this fear that of how you're going to be vilified. You know, there's this fear of what they're going to do to you, how you're going to be demonized, like the hatred that's going to come at you from the elites. And there needs to be the total opposite. Like that needs to be celebrated. You need to, you know, as FDR, like they embrace their hatred. Like that's what you have to do.
They are unanimous in their hatred and I welcome their hatred is what he said, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I welcome their hatred. That's gotta be the mindset. I mean, when he was running, it's like 85% of newspapers endorsed against him. The mainstream economists, the academics, the business interests. I mean, every elite sector of society despised this guy and did everything they could to mobilize against him. And it's not just he won in spite of that and was wildly popular in spite of that. It's that actually was an affirmative selling point.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like a big part of, I think, Donald Trump's appeal was that he welcomed their hatred. Now, of course, he ended up governing on their behalf, right? But even that display of like watching people melt down about the norms and whatever, like people lived for that. It was enough for people to like gravitate to this monstrous, ultimately plutocrat who did the bidding of the wealthy. But he at least had the show of the pearl clutching and the meltdowns, et cetera. And people are craving exactly that FDR posture of I welcome their hatred. And everyone seems most afraid of leaning into that. One of the best moments from Bernie's campaign, I thought, was remember when he went after Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post? And there was like a whole
with the Rob Costas?
Yeah, there was a whole media meltdown.
Oh, yeah. Brian, I remember now. Brian, what's his name? MSNBC. Williams. He read the tweet by Horse Whisperer in response to the media melt.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot about that part of it. Oh my God. Yeah. Memories. Yeah. But yeah, when he was like, yeah, the Washington Post is trashing me. They're also owned by Jeff Bezos. Wonder why they don't like me when they're owned by this billionaire. And there was this collective for how can you say that about the Washington Post? They're so, you know,
dies in darkness.
But people loved it. And it was, you know, it was a great moment in the campaign as poll numbers went up. People enjoyed seeing that. Another great moment for Bernie, going back to the conversation we were having about appealing to people who aren't already ideologically aligned with yourself, is like he went on Fox News, did the town hall. That was kind of controversial. He was legitimizing Fox News, et cetera. But again, people loved it. It was a great moment for him in the campaign, probably one of the highlights of the campaign, to be honest with you. He was able to go toe to toe. He was able to persuade people. He won over the audience. So, leaning into that, like, I welcome their hatred and I'm not afraid of it, I think is sorely missing from our politics and something that people would desperately love to see.
Yeah. I spent quite a bit of time canvassing around in South Carolina. And what I realized is that there is a reason why people say socialism beats barbarism. It's because Bernie reject the establishment, the way they ask questions is framed so that there's one ideological answer that it's tilted towards because of the way, for example, they'll never ask Trump, how are we going to pay for your wars? But they'll always ask Bernie, how are we going to pay for Medicare for all? But the truth is that we have monetary sovereignty and we can pay for whatever we want. Yes. And Bernie always doesn't accept that framing. And so what I noticed with at least people who leaned towards the right is that they like people who can give short, honest, quick answers because they don't trust the nuances. So it was funny because I actually ended up, when I was canvassing South Carolina, I ended up persuading somebody with the Trump sign. Basically, he asked me, are you a communist? And it's like, yep, I'm a member of the CPUSA. And then boom, it just broke their guards down. And then they invited me to have some beer with them. And then at the end of the night, I actually got them absentee ballots and drove to vote for Bernie. But it was just that I was not lying to them. I was honest. And they and then you can then basically I've noticed with right wingers, if you just say you're a communist outright, they lose their argument because their entire argument is saying that you're a secret communist. But then when you're an open communist,
no.
I'm open. Here's my card. Suddenly, they're only, and so after that, they're just really just lost.
That's
once
funny.
I once did this in this funny. I mean, I understand the debate is performance, so I am not that wedded to the rules of the debate. There's an example where it's if the right wing can claim that, I don't know, Mao or Stalin killed 100 billion people, I can totally also claim that all of the 100 billion people they killed were Nazis. And then that just gives them a different framing. So Bernie does that often when he said something okay, so I believe this was, it happened during the 2016 where Hillary Clinton was I don't support fracking here, there, wherever. And Bernie was no, because he was not appeasing a secret donor base. So he could just say no fracking. And as opposed to Hillary, where she was trying to find loopholes because she was trying to please two bases, and then you're going to have to cheat one. And it's always the American people who gets cheated, of course.
Very true. But yeah, that simplicity in political messaging, I do think is one of the kind of undersold genius elements of Sanders' campaign, because you knew what it was. It's Medicare for all, it's a living wage, $15 minimum wage, it's just Green New Deal, it's very clear, right? It's very clear. It's very understandable. Everybody knows what Medicare is.
Yes.
So Medicare for all, you know what that is.
Just expanding the age.
Yeah, versus Medicare for those who want it, Medicare for America, even the public option is more complicated to understand. I saw, as kind of a side note, I saw the Koch network is mobilizing to make sure, I don't even hear Biden talking about the public option anymore. So I'm not sure that this is really a threat at this point, but they're mobilizing to make sure there's no public option. And they've created their own plan called the personal option to try to rebut it. It's it's just hilarious. But I kind of see oftentimes Democrats, they love the technocratic details. Yeah. There's nothing that they love more than, some super complex white paper, Elizabeth Warren, I got a plan for that. Go and read my, or Hillary Clinton would always be go to my website and read my policy. No one's going to do that. You got to be upfront with people in a way that's understandable. And that's not because people are stupid. It's because they're busy. And also because, like you said, they are rightly suspicious of shit that's overly complicated, because it always ends up like, we know who the loopholes are going to benefit. We know what the fine print's going to say. So if it's straightforward and it's upfront, then people are going to trust it a lot more. And I don't think that's people being stupid or irrational. I actually think it makes all the sense in the world, given the way that typically everybody gets screwed over in the fine print and in the loopholes.
Exactly. And that's why often, for example, like for me, the worst part is where the Democrats like deny reality, and then they make Trump look like a brave truth teller for saying something like John McCain is a war criminal or something like really obvious, like whatever, like, or John McCain's a bad person. Like, yes, we all know that. But somehow the Democrats like deny, I don't know, their response, like they respond oddly by denying reality, like with the Hunter Biden thing, where they were trying to find the nuance.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and it's like, why just sacrifice Hunter for? Like, I don't get that.
Well, like you said, it would take all the air out of the argument if you were like, yeah, that was corrupt. You know, like we had on Rising, we had Congressman Ted Lieu on, and we were pressing him on Hunter, like, okay, yeah, what Trump is saying about, like, you know, the more outlandish claims are at the very least unsubstantiated. But we know he was on, like, sat on the board of this company. We know he made a lot of money. We know he's not a Ukrainian gas expert. So just on the merits of that, look, it might not be illegal, but can you still say it's corrupt? Can you still say it looks bad? Can you still say it's wrong? And he was like, his response was so flippant. It was like, well, people sit on boards and they make money. And it was like, what? Like, why can't you just acknowledge that? And Elizabeth Warren had trouble answering this question on the trail as well, when she was out with a new plan, anti-corruption plan, and she was making this a big plank of her campaign, whatever. And someone asked a very obvious question, like, okay, well, what about Hunter and what about Joe? And she really didn't know how to respond. When the answer is obvious, like, again, I mean, the bar is set so low from a legal perspective on corruption that it's not technically probably illegal. It doesn't make it okay. That doesn't mean you just like look the other way. But I mean, the other thing with that is it's also normalized in DC. It's just like, is the way that people operate. So they're like, well, he's doing what everybody else does, so why should we hold that against him? But that's exactly the problem.
Yeah, it's like a filter because everyone who does that kind of stuff happens to be in DC. Like millions of us don't sit on any boards.
Right. Yeah, people sit on boards. It's like, well, yeah, like this very tiny sliver of American, but that's the class of Americans that you associate with. I'm sure all of your friends sit on boards, but to most people, they're looking at this and looking at the numbers. I can't even remember at this point because my, this year, everything's been sucked out of my brain, but he was making a lot of money on that board. And those numbers, I'm sure, were pretty shocking to a lot of people, but they just looked the other way. And actually, I have to look at it. You probably followed this, maybe, Esha, as like, this new intelligence report about Russia's activity in this election.
Yes.
And somehow liberals spun this out as like, it turns out the Hunter Biden laptop really was Russian disinformation when the report didn't actually say anything like that. But anyway, there you go.
Well, that's the thing that they don't understand is that Russia does not have to lie to make America look bad. The truth is bad enough. Like there's
you just tell the truth. That's the thing. You just tell the truth and they're like, this is Russian propaganda. We're like, no, we're just telling the truth.
Oh yeah. Like that's the basic thing is like in order to make capitalism look bad or America look bad, you do not ever have to lie. You just have to show a video of any city and it'll like, so people don't understand that the reason why the US has to engage in disinformation is because clearly there's usually no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So they have to lie to like make that case to you. But to negate that, like you just have to, so people just don't understand like how these like interests line up. And I guess for me, what segues into like the next piece is that it kind of explains basically what the, I call them nuance cucks, basically, the ones who are like, well, Obama's bombs are different than Trump's bombs. And I know the one, the child cages versus, what is it now? What's the new word?
I don't know, even know. They're like detention.
Children's facility or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, come on, you just changed the word. It's still the same person, same agency, same people guarding it, same guns, same people are in wherever you are. Like, and so this kind of, it's like a brand name. So what I love about this piece is that it explains, well, you'll see. It explains that how basically these reformists are kind of like denying reality. So shall we get started?
Okay. Impoverishment in capitalist society. Bourgeois reformists, who are echoed by certain opportunists among the social democrats, assert that there is no impoverishment of the masses taking place in capitalist society. The theory of impoverishment is wrong, they say, for the standard of living of the masses is improving, if slowly, and the gulf between the haves and have-nots is narrowing, not widening. Well, that part's not true anymore. The falsity of such assertions has lately been revealed to the masses more and more clearly. The cost of living is rising. Wages, even with the most stubborn and most successful strike movement, are increasing much more slowly than the necessary expenditure of labor power. And side by side with this, the wealth of the capitalists is increasing at a dizzy rate. Here are some data on Germany, where the workers' condition is far better than in Russia, thanks to a higher standard of culture, to freedom of strikes and association, to political liberty, to the millions of trade unionists and the millions of readers of workers' newspapers. According to data furnished by bourgeois sociologists who draw on official sources, wages in Germany have increased by an average of 25% during the past 30 years. In the same period, the cost of living has gone up by at least 40%. Food, clothing, fuel, and rent have all become more expensive. The worker is becoming impoverished, absolutely, i.e., he is actually becoming poorer than before. He is compelled to live worse, to eat worse, to suffer hunger more, and to live in basements and attics. But the relative impoverishment of the workers, i.e., the diminution of their share in the national income, is still more striking. The workers' comparative share in capitalist society, which is fast-growing rich, is dwindling because the millionaires are becoming even richer. There is no income tax in Russia, and no data are available on the growing wealth of the well-to-do classes of society. Our reality, which is even sadder, is shut off by a veil, the veil of ignorance and lack of publicity. In Germany, there are exact data on the wealth of the propertied classes. In Prussia, for example, the first 10,000 million marks, 5 million rubles, of taxable property belonged to 4,853 persons in 1902 and 1,108 in 1908. The number of the very rich has diminished. Their wealth has increased. In 1902, each of them owned property worth 5 million marks on the average, and in 1908, as much as 9 million marks. People speak of the upper 10,000. In Prussia, the upper 21,000 rich owned property valued at 13,500 million marks, while the taxable property of the remaining 1.3 million owners was worth only 3,000 million marks. 4 of the wealthiest millionaires in Prussia, 1 prince, 1 duke, and 2 counts, owned property worth 149 million marks in 1907 and 484 million marks in 1908. Wealth in capitalist society is growing at an incredible rate, side by side with the impoverishment of the mass of the workers.
Yeah. For me, I love this piece because it explains like how you, like every statistic is like the child poverty bullshit. Oh my God. Like any statistic you can BS because like, yes, for 2 months, people will be able to pay more bills, or 1 month or whatever that $1,400 covers. But then like, it's going to go back down. And so what I notice is that a lot of like, so we do see a lot of this like denying reality in like the most bizarre way that is like, and the Democratic Party is especially guilty of this, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, with if you look at this relief bill and you see even, people who I consider to be like on the better side of things being like, this is the most incredible piece of legislation in generations, which I think says more about the generation.
Yes,
about this.
Exactly.
Like, it's kind of a really low bar, but
very low.
I mean, how much am I supposed to celebrate a child tax credit that expires in a year? Like, okay, how is that transformative? It's not, right? By definition, something that's going to be over in 1 year's time. And look, I know they say, oh, we want to make it permanent, but Catholic, I'll believe it when I see it,
Why didn't they make it permanent now? That's
to start with. Right.
Exactly.
That would have been the move if they actually wanted to make it permanent, but we'll see. We will see. Again, prove me wrong, people. I would love to be proven wrong on this.
That's what I always say too. Like for me, and this is why, like, okay, so the idea of reforming is like working within the system, and just but then like somehow when you're working within the system, you kind of become its like wing or arm or whatever. And so like, for example, like we all know that most of congressional power is held by like the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader.
Right.
But most Americans, like, they need to like see by example. So for I can't, for example, I think the best way to show that is just by introducing a bill and seeing that like with somebody who has a good Instagram following, and like then seeing that bill like being thrown, like world peace bill or something, and being thrown out, because that just shows you like who has the reins. And what I notice is that like a lot of times this choice is, it's like, I understand like a lot of progressives are like, okay, if we can do like a marginal improvement, like it's better. But then it's like, you mentioned this too, then you're not using power, and then you're not going to, and so often because of their morality, progressives can be easily seduced by marginal improvements, if that makes sense.
True. The centrists, it's not, I should never call them centrists. The right wingers in the Democratic caucus, who are wildly out of step with the mainstream of America, they never hesitate to be willing to blow something up in order to give people less, right? Like Joe Manchin, totally willing to walk away from the relief bill if you don't like cut provisions further to make sure that fewer people get money. They're always willing to use their power to walk away, to blow something up, because they don't ultimately care. Whereas, yeah, if you actually care about this stuff, and it becomes harder to walk away, it becomes harder to flex your muscles and use that power, because ultimately you do care about people getting some help, even if it's short term, even if it's not going to last, even if it's just marginal and incremental. So, over and over again, we see that morality basically weaponized against the progressives in Congress, where they're just never going to be willing. I mean, I remember the House Democrats, I think Ro Khanna led the writing of a letter saying, hey, we really want to see the $15 minimum wage in the Senate relief bill that comes through. It went through the House. We want to see it in the Senate bill. And then immediately thereafter, he gets asked, well, are you gonna walk away from it if it's not in there? He's like, no. So it's like, okay, well, we're not going to do it then. So sorry. If you're not going to fight on something that's as clear of a winner and as clear, just both a political winner and a substantive winner as the $15 minimum wage, then you're not going to fight on anything. I mean, I think that's just the truth.
Oh, no, I agree with you on that. And for me, I think it's because of that temptation of like marginal improvement, where they're like, ooh, like it is literally because they care that it works. But somehow, I guess they need to, do they need to hear that the American people are with them, and we want you to fight? We don't really care about this marginal improvement because we want, like, I'm trying to figure out why that temptation is so powerful, like with progressives, like besides that they care, like what is it that they lack?
I think it's a couple things. I think number one, it's an intangible thing, which is leadership. I think you don't have someone who has that perspective, who's really taken the ball and like getting everybody on board and gathering together the few members who would fall into that camp. I think that's one thing. I think another thing is this fear of being demonized, because, look, Joe Manchin can walk away all day long and Morning Joe and the mainstream press will cover, oh, he's just representing the interest of West Virginia, which is like complete
coal miners.
It's such just like a polar opposite of what the actual situation is. But he'll get covered in the press. He doesn't have to worry about that. So I think they're afraid of being demonized, which they 100% would be, right? Like, oh, they're blowing up this bill and people need help and they got to compromise. They're so uncompromising. They're so radical and extreme, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think it is, there's the DC brain, there's you got to go work along with us so that, and the peer pressure that comes to bear. And this is really the way that you get things done. This is really the way that you make progress. And then I think it is having their own morality and goodwill and desire to actually help people used against them. I think those are the pieces, really. I mean, there's probably some other elements that I'm not thinking about, but I really think, for people who aren't corrupted by money, who genuinely want to do the right thing, I think those are the factors and the strings that get pulled that continually lead to this same result over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is really heartbreaking for me, is that a lot of people assume that if we can elect 100 AOCs, we're going to have Medicare for all. But unfortunately, like, the process of electing 100 AOCs means that you have the first 50 AOCs becoming Washington brained. And so you'll never have that 100, right? And so it's like, this is like a second level problem that it's so hard to explain, and it's so hard to even talk about, because you can't see the open secrets money from like Lockheed Martin coming in, and they're still getting $10 donations, but then nothing fundamentally changes. And Biden, that's like the only campaign promise he's kept.
Yeah, no, that one he's definitely going to make good on, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So I guess for me, I guess one thing I do want to see is that, like, people just like thinking of whose side do we want to be on, American people or not American people, as opposed to, like, that way we don't have to turn into the resistance for the squad, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, yes, that's actually a really interesting way of putting it, where it's just like, whatever they do, we're going to say is great. We don't care. Like, whatever it is, we're going to pretend it's great, You just have to, I mean, there can be a price in the short term for being honest, right? There can be a price to pay for that. And there can be a price to the movement in the short term for you being honest. But in the long term, you lose all credibility if you're not just calling things as you see them and not carrying water for, cheerleading for, even the people that you think really have good intentions, who you really are cheering for and hope are going to live up to their, the promise of what they could do given the power that they have. So it can be an uncomfortable thing. And like I said, it can actually result in short-term losses, but over the long term, it's the only answer.
Yeah. For me, it was hard to call out AOC because I was helping her canvas. I was there in like October, like when she was not a big person. And I know that she has the best of intentions, but then I still have to be conscious that even though I like this person a lot, I have to call her out when she does it, because it's like she's not alone. She doesn't have time. So she has these staffers who are her staffers, people with experience. That means they're not questioning this. Like, there's a lot of other things and so it's a hard thing to do. I understand this, like when you like somebody. And so I understand the temptation, but then we have to just kind of remember that it's not about them. Like, you calling out them is not like a personal indictment of their character, but more like an indictment of the system, maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And, I think to do it in the right way and not question the motives, but just like look tactically, I think you're really, not doing the right thing here. And it's not living up to what could be done in this situation with the tools and the power that you have. Because again, look, AOC is a member of Congress now. She is a member, even though she, comes from working class background and waitress and bartender and all of that, which is, really informed her view and makes her such an important figure in American politics. But she is a member of the nation's elite now, and she does have access to power, not only through her elected position, but through the online cultural influence that she has as well. And so, that means that just like anyone else, she should be held responsible to the promises that she makes and the actions that she takes to support those promises.
Yep. And before you head out, can you just give us the URL once more so that people know to check out your show? What day do you release it, or do you have it just once a week?
We do. So it's once a week. The video comes out on Friday for subscribers on Substack.com.
It's like a cup of coffee or 2 cups of coffee.
Yes. And then exactly. And then the audio is released on Saturdays, and it's on, whatever, the podcast thing on Apple and Stitcher and Spotify and all the other ones for free, no ads. That comes out on Saturday. And that also goes out to our Substack people. And by the way, I should mention, there's 2, so you can sign up on Substack and you still get our newsletters, you still get the audio sent into your inbox, but there's, it's all free. The only thing that requires that $5 payment is to get the video and to get it a day early on Friday. So
you're also supporting an independent newscaster as opposed to MSNBC.
Yeah, that is true. Although, I mean, my independent status is sort of like pseudo because of the Hill affiliation, but yes, that is definitely the case. And we're not doing any ads. So it's the only way. If you want to support the podcast, that's the way to do it, is because we're not taking any money in any other way.
Okay. Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of things are way more expensive because you have one podcast requires somebody who edits the audio and somebody who does the video, and it's easier if you can have actual staff members to pay as opposed to so people are better off if everyone decides to pitch in. The more people pitch in with smaller amounts is the better model.
Yes, for sure. Much better model than me having to read some ad for some company or whatever. So, and we're really grateful. People have responded extraordinarily well to it. We've had thousands of people sign up to be subscribers, and it's been really exciting. So thank you to those of you who have been hanging out with us there.
Well, thank you for coming on, and everyone check out Krystal's show. We'll put a link below, and I had a lot of fun. We should try to do this again some other time soon.
I would love that, Esha. Thank you so much for having me. It's great chatting with you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I should have said привет. So I've been trying to understand the Dunning-Kruger effect. And the funniest thing is that I think I finally understand after, okay, so anyways, first off, let me ask, is there anyone who has any questions? So about this piece, about anything else, just if you have any questions, let me know. Janet? Okay, perfect. Okay, let me, I guess, explain what I learned a lot. The most I learned from Lenin is how to critically read each piece. So I learned that you're supposed to read each sentence and look at the meaning of each sentence and then see what they're trying to say. Then you kind of look at the meaning of each word and see how the meaning can change in different contexts and put all those meanings together, all the ways the sentences can mean different things. And then you fact check that. And that's all he does. But with that, you learn so much about how people don't even know that they just don't know. There's so much ideology is some sort of, it's like bullshit that they give you so that you don't really understand reality. And once you understand a reality and always know how to reject ideology, suddenly it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And now, for example, I am you get pattern detection. So this is kind of funny thing is that I just noticed that one thing that liberals make a mistake is that there's such a thing called a black swan event. Nicholas Taleb, I think, mentioned it. So a black swan event is a super rare event. And usually there's a lot of rules that apply to normal circumstances. Like oh, maybe it's bad to perjure dissidents, maybe X or maybe Y. But there are some events called the Black Swan event where this is just, this is actually, like, if you get the context, it's completely different. For example, with the World War II, they'll say something like, Stalin sent 3 million people into the gulags. It sounds like, oh my God, he sent a lot of people to the gulags. But this is not an ordinary time. This is World War II. You know how many literally soldiers of the Wehrmacht, Nazis, were inside the USSR at that point? 18 million, 18.2 million soldiers of the Wehrmacht. And they did the most horrific shit. And we know that actually they probably did more horrific stuff, but this is just the evidence that the Red Army was able to capture before it got destroyed. So then when you're like, oh, so he gave amnesty to 12 million Nazis? And then you're going to be like me and you're like, oh my God, Stalin did not kill enough Nazis. And so that's how you kind of go from Stalin's a brutal dictator who suppressed dissent versus to what were they dissenting on? Oh, Stalin did not want people to exterminate Jews, and the dissidents did. Aha. Okay. And then when you finally realize that the last piece of the puzzle is realizing how big this is just a German army. So actually, if you add up the Hungarian army, the Romanian army, the French anti-Bolshevik volunteers, the collaborators from the Netherlands, Finland, it's way more than 18 million. So when you get that, and the thing is that Germany looks small, but you don't realize in that little small space, there are 80 million people today. And it's a very highly populated country, despite it looking small to you. And that's also a hard thing for people to grasp. So these little things that just kind of are just happenstance of circumstance, and World War II is an absolute unique event because we've only had, I guess, 2 world wars. So what happens is that if you have not been trained to kind of like see the other side, if you've never actually had both sides of perspective, you don't even know that you're not getting the other side. And that's often the trap that a lot of liberals just walk into each and every time. But anyways, I hope you guys had fun. Please share this show with everyone, and please donate if you can. Click on historically.substack.com, and hopefully we can get Janet working with us full time so that we can like bring you even more content, and we can make maybe more than just Sunday with Lenin. But we can't if we can't have Janet working full time, and if she can't pay her bills and whatever. So it's just $5 a month, and hopefully we can have a lot of fun because Lenin's hilarious, and maybe we can move on to other figures like Gramsci or whoever else you guys like too. I wouldn't be opposed to that either. And each writer has a unique style. So often you might be able to learn the same concept, but you might find one of the writers to be more entertaining or more fun or more your style. And that's often okay if you can learn the same concept. So it's not that Lenin's a magic bullet, but I just like him because he's funny and he makes me laugh. And no one makes me laugh as much as Lenin. So that's what I like about him. But like I said, the most important thing is learning how to think in dialectical, materialistic terms and understanding how to apply historical materialistic analysis. And if you can do that, you don't actually have to read Lenin or Marx. You'll automatically logic yourself into the right position all the time. But it's incredibly hard to teach if you don't read Lenin or Marx. I guess it's the easiest way to teach people how to do it. But with that having said, that, I hope you guys have a good rest of the week and join us next Sunday. Also subscribe to also become a free subscriber or a paid subscriber, and you can get our once a week podcast episodes. I also write articles. So hopefully we can create a better world together, hopefully. I mean, I'm not going to be creating the better world for you, but I will be hopefully like teaching you just dialectical materialism, and then you guys can read Lenin and learn how to create a better world from him. And with that, I say